Welcome back to One Piece Explained. We are on the final episode of the One Piece live action series by Netflix and Tomorrow Studios, and boy has this been such an exciting ride going through this entire season with you all. Thank you so much for your support on these breakdowns over the past few weeks. Now, if this is your first time watching these videos, just know I make these breakdowns with the intent of being engaging and exciting for both longtime fans as well as any new ones, so I'll be treading around any big reveals that may be better experienced at your own pace. However, I will be talking about characters, settings, and story arcs in a more general sense. Also, just real quick, over 90% of my viewers are not subscribed, so if you're in that group and you've been enjoying these videos, I would really appreciate it if you do. Now, with all of that said, let's get into the breakdown. The title of this episode is Worst in the East, and this is a nod to the title of Chapter 96 in the manga, which this episode loosely adapts. The title card for this episode is themed after Arlong, with his crew's Jolly Roger in the O, as well as the final E in peace being replaced with his weapon, the Shark Saw. The P in peace also contains the Sun Pirate symbol that we talked about in the previous episode. From the title card, we zoom past a marine base stationed on a hill on the Konomi Islands. Now, this may be an adaptation of the 16th Branch's marine base that Captain Nezumi oversees. In the source material, it is of course themed after a rat, much like Nezumi's own design. However, here it seems to be a bit more of a traditional structure. Nezumi's whole operation begins to fall apart as he faces down Garp's scrutiny, and I love this addition. In the source material, Nezumi just kind of gets beat up by the Straw Hats and has to retreat back to his base. He reports the Straw Hats and makes them out to be these terrible pirates, much like he does here in front of Garp, but we never see him have to face the consequences from the Marines for covering up Arlong's acts, so I'm glad to have him cower before Garp here in this live action. Meanwhile, at Arlong Park, the fishmen are blindsided by a bunch of smoke bombs exploding around them. This is an adaptation of Usopp's smoke star technique that he first used during the Arlong Park arc to try and escape. We actually saw him prepare these in the previous episode with Buggy mocking him, and you may even recognize this bottle of ketchup here that he'll use later on in this episode as well. The Straw Hat crew arrives, and the battle that ensues is a very abbreviated version of it from the source material. Luffy heads straight up to the map room, effectively skipping his initial bouts against the Arlong pirates and Arlong himself, while Sanji and Zoro take on the rest of the Arlong pirates. Now, Zoro did wipe out a bunch of Arlong's men in the source material, while the rest of them were taken out by Luffy's Gum Gum Pinwheel or Gum Gum Windmill, depending on the translation. And perhaps the closest adaptation of the source material here is Usopp and Chu's fight. Usopp fires a smoke star and hits Chu, drawing the fishman's wrath towards him and starting their chase throughout the woods. Now, in the source material, Usopp had accidentally hit Chu with Luffy's rubbery body initially, and then followed up by a fire star to get him away from the townsfolk. We see an adaptation of his Lippo Wurtzer as it was translated in the Viz edition, where he shoots out successive shots of water at high speed, but here he uses his own alcohol that he had been drinking instead of water from the ocean. Over with Arlong and Luffy, Arlong's Shark Saw looks fantastic. However, notice the little X-shaped accents on the blades. Now, in the source material, the saw looked to have the individual blades fixed onto a pole arm with a katana's handle, whereas here, it's designed to be a huge blade itself, but I do like that they still worked in the little X's into the design. Meanwhile, Buggy says that he can feel his body is close and finally gets his body back. As we learned in Volume 12's SBS, Buggy loses control of his body at a certain distance, so he couldn't just make his body find his head until he got close enough. There is an adaptation of Usopp's ketchup star technique where he fakes his death using his ketchup bottle. On the bottle itself, you can make out the brand Boshi, which is of course the Japanese word for star and acts as a nice little nod to the names of Usopp's techniques in the original Japanese. And it reads that it was made and bottled on the Gecko Islands, where Usopp is originally from. And then we get the climax of Usopp's fight with Chu as he unleashes his special attack, Exploding Star. Now, in the source material, he actually throws a bottle of alcohol at Chu to make him flammable, and then he delivers a fire star to ignite and defeat him. Here, he shoots an exploding star, which is the technique he used to defeat Django during the Syrup Village arc. Also of note, this is the third instance of a character in the show calling out their attack names for their finishing moves. Luffy does it throughout the season, Buggy calls out his Chop Chop Cannon, and now Usopp with his exploding star. And we'll get one more by the end of this episode. Over at Arlong Park, we have Zoro and Sanji facing off against Kurobi, a departure from the source material as Zoro is paired off against Hachi, who we discussed a bit in the previous breakdown, but there was also a recent interview with Screen Rant where one of the showrunners, Steven Maeda, talked about Hachi's exclusion in the series. Kurobi expresses the difference between their power, and mentions being able to destroy a ship's keel with his kicks. Now, this could be seen as a slight nod to the destructive power of the fishmen, as we saw in the source material when Kurobi was able to easily remove a marine ship's rudder. Sanji retorts by saying this is nothing compared to Zeph, and this is all a slight adaptation of Sanji and Kurobe's exchange in the source material when Kurobe talks to him about being a 40th degree master of Fishman Karate, and Sanji replies with Zeph's kicks being 400th degree in that case. Now, Kurobe delivers a dropkick to Sanji, which could be seen as a nod to his attack from the source material, named the Instant Undersea Bowel Buster in the English Viz edition, but its original name in the Japanese was a little bit closer to the Sea Speed Stomach Dropkick. Back inside the map room, Luffy breaks Arlong's teeth, much like in the source material, but Arlong is of course able to grow them back, much to his surprise, and realizing he may not be able to defeat Arlong by himself, Luffy begins to destroy Arlong Park. Luffy punching these stone columns to show that he can take down Arlong feels a bit reminiscent of him crushing stone with his fists in the source material to prove that he doesn't need strong teeth to be on Arlong's level. Back outside, Kurobe angers Sanji by talking down on Nami, and we get a string of attack names straight from the source material. He starts off with a kick to the rib, Cotelette, transitions into a heel drop to the neck, Collier, then a kick to the shoulder, Epaulet, and then a kick straight to the chest, Poitrine, and he finishes it off with a mouton shot, just like in the source material. Now, these attack names all come from the French word for the associated body part, playing into the whole idea of Sanji being a chef and dealing with various cuts of meat, while mouton is the French word for the cooked meat of a lamb. Now, note that this specific string of attacks isn't one-to-one with the source material, however, the majority of it is there, and of course, this is all capped off with Zoro poking fun at Sanji for calling out his finishing moves, calling back to episode 1. When Kurobe gets sent flying back, you can make out some more decorations at the bar, and there are quite a few that look so familiar, but I just can't really put my finger on some of them. They definitely look like classic Oda designs, but they seem to be made into caricatures, so they're a bit harder to make out for sure. There's one that looks a bit like Marco, and another one that sort of looks like Vice Admiral Stainless, though the mustache isn't really one-to-one, and even the one that people were saying looks like Ace doesn't really match up because he has the beaded necklace and it's white and not red, and in the previous breakdown I talked about how the one that people thought was Spectre from Jaya doesn't line up either because of the headpiece being different. Perhaps these are just versions of some Oda designs that have been made into caricatures, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the rest of these in the comments. Luffy delivers two classic techniques, the Gum Gum Gatling and then the Gum Gum Battle Axe, but if you look closely, when he destroys the shark head atop the building, the internal structure that holds up the flag is actually a fishbone. Pretty cool stuff. Later that night at the party, we get an outfit change for Nami, who is wearing a dress inspired by her appearance on the color spread featured in chapter 107. We see some tangerine wine being poured, and it's local from Cocoa Village, as a nod to Bellmare and Nojiko's tangerine farm. You can spot some pizza being served at the party, which is definitely canon to the world of One Piece, as we've seen characters eat it later on in the story. Nojiko tells Sanji that she needs his recipes and that he should write a cookbook, a fun nod at the One Piece Pirate Recipes cookbook that exists in real life. The dish that Sanji is serving up actually looks like it could even be the seafood risotto that is listed in that book. Usopp boasts to the villagers about how he defeated the fishmen, just like he does in the source material, and much to everyone's surprise, the Marines arrive and are ordered to arrest the crew. Now this can be seen as a slight twist on the arrival of Nezumi and the 16th branch at the end of the arc in the source material. Garp tells Luffy that there's no more running and that he should give it up, to which Luffy responds that's not really his thing. And this specific choice of words reminds me a lot of the One Piece rap used as the theme song for the 4Kids dub, which included the lines, "Give it up, Luffy." Garp sends Luffy flying with the fist on several occasions, and we get this shot just lingering on his clenched fist. On his official reveal in the source material after the Enies Lobby arc, we would learn that Garp's epithet was the fist. Luffy puts everything he has into a Gum Gum rocket, which funny enough is actually one of the first techniques that we see him use in the source material, so it being the final named attack that he uses in this series is pretty interesting. There's also some thematic cohesion here, I suppose, as Garp's techniques tend to follow a pattern of being space related, such as the meteor fist we talked about as we saw adapted in episode 5, so the rocket being used here makes some thematic sense. When Garp has Luffy at the end of his rope, he laughs and stays determined, recalling Roger's laugh at the face of his own death. Now this comparison between Luffy and Roger was made by Zeph in the previous episode, and here we get it once again. This works as a light adaptation of this comparison being made for the first time during the Logtown arc in the source material, and this leads Garp to burst into laughter as well, a very appropriate response with the context of the greater story in the source material. Garp then orders the Marines to round up the Arlong pirates and arrest them, and we wouldn't see this in the manga until later on during Hachi's cover story, and it wouldn't be confirmed until much later on into the story anyways, but Nezumi protests and says the real criminals are the Straw Hats, before Nami comes in and beats him over the head, straight from the source material. Later on, Koby arrives before Luffy, and Luffy wonders if he's there to see them off, to which Koby responds that he doesn't think it's a good idea. This can be seen as a nod to the source material where Koby and the Marines of Shellstown salute Luffy and Zoro on their way out. Koby provides Luffy with his first bounty poster, coming full circle with them at the bounty board in episode 1. And you can also spot Usopp in the background, just like how the poster is in the source material. Koby calls this Nezumi's last act of revenge, as in the source material, he is the one who calls this bounty in personally. And we go around the world and see various people react to Luffy's bounty, as we did in the chapter that this episode's title is referencing. Makino opens up the paper, and you can make out that the name of the paper that we discussed in the episode 3 breakdown is there, the World Economic Newspaper. And there are a bunch of listings that generally seem to be for stuff happening around the town and stuff being sold, though there's actually a lot of consecutive ads for Newell's Pulmonary Syrup, which apparently was a real thing from San Francisco that had ads in the newspaper. From the looks of it, the newspaper here has a bunch of little nods to real-world ads that were printed in the newspaper in the centuries prior, in our real world. Next to it is an ad for Singer Sewing Machines, which I believe is a company that is still around, but they did have old newspaper ads as well. There are a bunch of more ads on the page, of course, that are a little harder to make out, but you will notice a couple that talk about spring and summer. I suppose this would somewhat line up with the idea that we're currently in August, as in episode 3 we learned that it was Kaya's birthday, which is August 24th canonically. But there's nothing to think about too hard here, this is all just some good fun. Speaking of Kaya, we go to see her in Syrup Village, where she is also reading the newspaper. But notice how her tea is now a more reasonable color for tea, and she seems to be doing a lot better. Maybe she's been taking some of that Newell's cough medicine from the newspaper ad. But this scene is actually adapted from the anime, as we don't get this in the source material of the manga, and since this adaptation has Mary dead, she finds out the news by herself. Before she turns the page to see Luffy's bounty, we can make out an ad for Terrence Seltzer Aperient. Now this was a real product that was used for constipation. But on the next page, besides the bounty poster, is some news stating that the country of Vera was taken over by the Revolutionary Army with their flag or logo up top. Now, this is a piece of news that we would learn in the chapter this episode is titled after. However, we wouldn't learn that it was the Revolutionary Army explicitly that was involved in this until much later. In fact, we wouldn't even really learn that they existed until around when Garp first meets Luffy in the source material, and we wouldn't get this flag shown here until about 500 chapters after that. So, this is definitely some great use of hindsight for this adaptation. Over at the Baratier, Zeph goes to put the poster up on the wall. This was also an adaptation of the anime, as this scene is not present in the source material, though on his way there, you can spot a can of tangerines or tangerine juice that prop photos showed as coming from Cocoa Village. A similar can was also present in the kitchen of Kaya's mansion back in episode 3. Now, a card for these tangerines are also present on the board that Zeph pins the poster to, but this one actually reads Nojiko's Tangerines. Next to it is a card for Sandora Lizard Meat, which is a giant lizard from Alabasta, as the card actually says, and this is some subtle foreshadowing of the setting during the next season. Also, above this is a card for the Mizu Mizu meat. This is also known as the Water meat that Luffy ate in Water 7. On the other side of the poster are the recipes for the Tomahawk Spiny Lobster and the Oregano Aged Wild Boar that we talked about in the episode 5 breakdown. And funny enough, there is even something about the Interstate Commerce Commission, also known as the ICC, a real-life government agency in the United States. We check in on Buggy, who removes Luffy's poster from atop his own, and he says that he'll kill him himself, very reminiscent of Thanos at the end of Age of Ultron. But big surprise, someone says if he doesn't, then she will, and we get the return of Alvida. I've been talking about how they've been adapting Buggy's cover story very lightly across this series, and his alliance with Alvida is a huge part of it, so I'm very happy to see this come into play. Behind Alvida looks to potentially be a poster of Don Krieg. Now, this is super interesting, because we actually saw what his poster looked like earlier in the series, and this does not match the appearance at all. However, this looks to be in a similar pose to his appearance on his poster from the source material, which makes me wonder if this is a picture of him after his encounter with Mihawk. Don Krieg does survive in the source material, so this could be a nod to him surviving in this adaptation as well. And I do wonder where this is all taking place. Could we perhaps be getting our first glimpse of Loketown in the modern day? Over with the Marines, Koby and KobyMeppo are ready for their punishment for disobeying orders when Garp tells them that what makes a good Marine is following your own Marine code, your own sense of justice. And without getting too much into spoilers, certain Marines that are introduced in the series have their own brand of justice that they adhere to. And in the chapter that this episode is titled after, we actually get introduced to the default motto of absolute justice that most Marines uphold and follow. Garp offers to train Koby and Helmeppo himself, and we get the realization that while the KobyMeppo cover story has been being adapted throughout this series, it's actually only adapted a portion of it. There's still the part left where Garp takes the two under his wing and personally trains them himself. Helmeppo mentions that he wants to prove that Zoro's not the only one who's good with swords, and throughout the series, Helmeppo has had a small obsession with swords that is looking to be foreshadowing for his abilities after training with Garp. And perhaps my favorite scene in this episode, we get the adaptation of Mihawk and Shanks meeting from chapter 96. Now, Yasopp has his hair grown out into dreads, and Beckman's hair has grayed, and he's now rocking the cape, just like in the source material. The Straw Hats show off their Jolly Roger with just minutes before the series comes to an end as they head for the Grand Line. This is a pretty cool move, as it shows that they are now finally a crew with all 5 members together, whereas in the source material, they got it right after Usopp joined. Nami points out that the entrance to the Grand Line requires them to go up a mountain, hinting at Reverse Mountain, which we'll see in the next season. Sanji pulls up a barrel, marked with the same logo as the one we saw Luffy had in episode 1 with the fishmonger, tying everything back together. On the deck, we see more boxes from the Galley Lock Company, as we've talked about throughout these breakdowns, but there's another box here that has the logo up top and reads Icebergs Sail Something, and then Shipwright Supplies. Iceberg is of course the president of the Galley Lock Company. And with this, we get the iconic barrel scene recreated with everyone sharing their hopes and dreams. We pan up and head out as we see the title card for the series appear with the sun shining through behind. Should that mean anything to you? Wink, wink. But that's not all. As the final scene of Season 1, we get a tease of Captain Smoker, and of course he's looking at Luffy's bounty poster, but notice that he's introduced stacking these rocks on top of one another just like how he was in the source material. Really fun detail. Oh, and what would these breakdowns be if we didn't go over the credits maps? We get this new map of the Konome Islands featuring Arlong Park up front, and you can make out Arlong's Saw Shark up top. The Polestar Islands have been brought back into the fold, and we see them featured here. This is the group of islands where Logtown is located. Speaking of, we get another quick map with Logtown marked. And finally, we have a map of the Grand Line. And there are some islands here that have familiar shapes. For example, this island here sort of resembles Jaya, while this one further down could be Water 7 as depicted in the anime. We zoom out and get a better look at this on the full map. Over here, maybe Alabasta, with the river running through the middle. All the way to the right could be Marineford. Up by the Polestar Islands, there are 2 ships, and they're a bit harder to make out. On the left looks to be a Marine ship, and on the right is possibly Raja's ship, the Oro Jackson, as the Straw Hat ship is still up by Syrup Village. But of course, all of this is still conjecture and speculation. And that's about it for all of the little details and Easter eggs that I want to talk about in this entire season of One Piece. As always, let me know if there's anything that you want to talk about in the comments. It has been an absolute blast and honor to be able to go through the series in depth with you all. I truly can't thank you enough for sticking with me through all these episodes, and I appreciate your patience that you had for me. I feel so grateful to be able to do this for the community that we've built up over the past few months, but not only that, it's still absolutely wild to me that we have a One Piece live action series. This is not something I would have ever dreamt of when I first saw the 4Kids dub as a child, or even when I started reading week to week over a decade ago. And we have come so far as One Piece fans, truly. What a time to be alive. But we're not done here. Season 2 was announced a little while ago, so I will definitely be covering that in detail when the time comes. If you've been enjoying my videos leading up to and throughout Season 1, then I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe so we can keep the channel growing and do bigger and better things. I have a video planned in the coming week or two where I'll be discussing my thoughts on Season 2 at length, what I'd like to see, a potential outline of the season episode by episode, how I'd incorporate certain story arcs, restructure things, etc. That's going to be a ton of fun to do, so I hope you'll check that out. And of course, I will be continuing my weekly manga breakdowns, as well as in-depth discussions of various topics in the world of One Piece that I find interesting. There are a couple of videos that I've been wanting to make for such a long time now, and I haven't really been able to find the time in the past few months because I've been so focused on the live action. But now that I have more time, I will definitely be able to talk about these other cool parts of the series. So until then, thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.